Thank you very much. My name is Gwynn from the British Foreign Office, and the role I have is the Envoy for Climate Change, dealing with countries that we are calling countries vulnerable to climate change. And you've asked what is the purpose of my visit. Sadly, I'm only here for 2 days in your lovely country, but I'm enjoying being here. The reason for coming to a country like Nepal is to come really to the front line, the global front line on climate change. I think there are many critical climate issues involved in Nepal, and I'm here to understand a bit more about them and to find a way to work with Nepal, both the government and the country, to try to inform the world more clearly about the sort of impact that climate change is causing in countries like Nepal and many others like it around the world. Okay. Well, the question is, where does Nepal stand in the process, if you like, of climate change worldwide? I think the best way to try to answer that is to talk about the UN negotiations, which are currently scheduled to take place in Denmark, the capital of Denmark, at Copenhagen, in December this year. Now, these are annual negotiations which take place within the United Nations framework on climate change. And they're particularly important this year because they are renewing some of the important international treaties on climate change, and particularly the Kyoto Protocol. And I'm sure you know the Kyoto Protocol determines the levels of greenhouse gases which are permitted to go into the world's atmosphere, and the greenhouse gases are primarily the cause of man-made climate change around the world. So the stakes are very high, if you like, this year to try to get an agreement at the Copenhagen talks in December which begin to bring under control the amount of greenhouse gases which are released into the atmosphere by human activity every year. Now, our belief is that every country in the world needs to be a willing partner in these talks. You can see climate change as the single biggest global issue. Some people would say there is no other real global issue because this is the only one that really impacts on everybody alive on the planet and all the generations to come as well. So the stakes are very high, and I think from the UK we have noticed that not all countries in the world are really playing a full part in the negotiations, are not able to play a full part at this stage. And so our concern, and my mission, if you like, underlying my own job, is to see if we can involve a larger number of countries around the world, including those which are particularly vulnerable already to the impacts of climate change, like Nepal, to give Nepal and other countries more of a voice. Scientifically, I think we in the UK and the European Union are aiming to limit climate change to less than a 2-degree rise. So it's a 2 degrees centigrade rise in global temperatures from the Industrial Revolution from 250 years ago. That's the target. And to do that, global emissions need to start to fall in the next few years. At the moment, if you look at a chart of global greenhouse gas emissions, they're continuing to rise because of our dependency on high carbon growth and development. But we need collectively, and Copenhagen is the main step for doing this, to find a way by which global emissions begin to fall again, really in the next 10 years. I think we in the UK are clear that there is a historic responsibility from the industrialised countries for being the main drivers of man-made climate change. I think that's an undeniable fact, and many people are aware of it and have said it. And I think that's important because there is then a responsibility on the industrialised countries to have a credible negotiating position in the UN talks. You know, there are a number of very complex and important issues under discussion, including issues like financing for climate change, for protection against climate change, transfers of technology, further levels of emissions reductions. And I think it's clear that the industrialised countries have a major responsibility to rise to the occasion, if you like, and to come to the UN talks with credible offers in those areas. But there are also other countries which are now major emitters, and we believe the outcome of the talks needs to take that into account as well. one of the main effects of climate change is that weather everywhere becomes less predictable, becomes more extreme but also less predictable, and that's a difficult combination for governments around the world to deal with. But as I've said, in my particular job, we're also concerned about the impact on some of the smaller economies, some of the countries around the world which are least able to cope. Our concern, as I've said, is that the experience of those countries needs to be taken more into account in the outcome of the negotiations. Well, the kind of things, every country has to look at its own geography, its availability of national resources, and consider what can be done within that country to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. That's the primary obligation, if you like, on every country. I think in Nepal you're very rich in potential hydro power and renewable energy. You have sunshine, you have the forest sector. These are all natural resources which can be used to reduce the amount of carbon emissions from your country. In the UK, for example, we are looking very closely at renewable energy. As you know, we're an island. We have very different geography to Nepal. We have lots of sea and no mountains. So we are looking at using wave power energy and wind power to generate electricity instead of fuels like coal. Well, the question is, what types of support are there? I think the climate agenda is a very diverse one, and support therefore takes many different kinds. We have, on the one hand, you have climate change already happening and the need for your communities to be able to adapt to that. And I think there are already some ideas for funding and technical advice to help adaptation to happen. I'm also talking about a more, if you like, a more political level of support, whereby, as I said, Nepal is seen as like an ambassador for climate change issues. And I think, again, there may be opportunities internationally for countries like Nepal to express their concerns about climate issues. I think when you look at the scientific predictions, what they're telling us is that weather patterns in the future will generally be less predictable, in a sense. So I think the prediction is that there will be more intense monsoon periods, but also drier periods in Nepal. And I think to some extent these changes are already being felt by people in the country. For example, I've heard that the crop season at higher altitudes is already changing. And it's important to remember that climate doesn't affect just environmental issues. It affects the whole economy, even society, in every country, not just Nepal, but everywhere. And for an example, another common result of climate change is the spread of new disease patterns. And again, I understand that the first case of dengue fever has now been seen in Kathmandu even, maybe last year. And this is characteristic of climate change, that diseases which were in one area can sometimes spread. So I think it's really for foreign government to give advice in that sense. But we're very keen to support the action that the government takes. I think our experience in the UK, as I've said, is that climate is an issue that needs a cross-governmental approach. And it's clear from contacts we've had here that that's the approach the government wants to adopt. I think our feeling, rather than advice, is to work together. And I think, if I may say, I think there's a real opportunity for Nepal to be an international advocate on climate issues, because your country is extremely well known around the world. Everybody knows the Himalayas are here, everybody knows the snow is melting, and I think there's a real opportunity for the government to be almost an ambassador for climate issues for countries like Nepal. And the UK would be very supportive of that, and will continue to work with the government and everybody else to try to make that happen.